Talofa Bulavinaka. Greetings. My name's Margaret Toomey. I'll be convening this august gathering. For that, I'd like to pay my tribute to the elders, past and present, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and to emerging leaders. I'm very impressed by this crowd. Goes to show something I've known since I joined the Foreign Service, and that is that the Pacific matters. So thank you very much for coming. My own background is someone who served twice in Fiji as Deputy High Commissioner during the tumultuous 2000s for the George Speight coup and subsequent mutiny, and then back again in 2014 with the restoration of High Commissioners after a hiatus after the 2006 coup. I've also been the permanent representative to the Pacific Islands Forum, which was a particularly fascinating and insightful experience for me. It was always my objective when I joined the Foreign Service to serve in the Pacific, in Fiji, and particularly important to me because of some family heritage. I think a lot of Australians do have a personal connection to somewhere in the Pacific, often not realised, and also had experience with amazing experience working in Timor-Leste as well, another near abroad neighbour. We have an excellent panel today. Two Fijians, or people coming from Fiji, and we have a panellist from Samoa and from Papua New Guinea. So you'll read their biographies in the excellent program we have here, but to my left we have John Apted. I have to confess that I've known him for many, many years, so maybe some prejudices there, I don't know.
Hi, Margaret. Hi, everyone.
I have then Maima Koro from Samoa. Welcome, Maima. Salote Tangi Wakatini from Fiji, and Henry Ivarature from Papua New Guinea, and currently at the ANU. So I don't know, are you Australian as well?
Want to be an Australian.
So I'm going to invite the panellists to speak for 6 to 8 minutes, and then we'll throw open to a more general discussion. And I'll throw the honour to Samoa and ask Maima if she's willing to share a few thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Margaret. So too low. You know you're in good hands when you're in the room and you look down and you see your elders in the room. So thank you. I'll claim you as my elder for today. And I join in acknowledging the respect to the people and the custodians of this land, and specifically for the permission to speak here. All protocols observed. So distinguished guests, I'll read just so that in the interest of time, I stay on script. I thank the AIIA for the opportunity to be here. I am from Samoa and Tokelau, and my perspective is framed by my cultural background and having lived and worked in the region. And as we gather here, Pacific representatives are in Baku for the COP29, advocating for meaningful actions to address climate change and its impacts. And I join them in spirit and wish them all the best. And in the spirit of this conversation, I will use, again, both analytical questions just to organize my thoughts. So what is real? Historically, the Pacific has been a region of interest to external partners for its geostrategic location and the region's abundant resources. For us, though, it is home, and that climate change is real. What is also real is that the benefits of our development aspirations has been unequal. In a research we are conducting in the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, with Pacific partners funded by the Australia Defence and Science Technology Group to understand communities' perceptions of security and stability, what it highlights is that essential services, such as access to quality health and education, sanitation, and water, remains the big issues. There are many factors that, of course, contribute to the mixed results of development outcomes in our region. Dr. Henrietta McNeil and I noted some of these in our paper, The Colonial Logic of Habits, in our reference to Australia's deployment of their economic statecraft in the region. On the other hand, of course, during our fieldwork in Vanuatu, a senior official stated that in their pursuit for globalization, they have forgotten their own communities. They play a hand. Their values and their traditions as well have been neglected. So in that research, there was a clear sense of emptiness from the remote communities. And that is a challenge for the people of Vanuatu to address. So what is also real is that there is a mismatch at times of the spirit of the Blue Pacific identity and the Indo-Pacific framing. Australia does exhaust the word family in the Blue Pacific narrative, and then commits to AUKUS in the Indo-Pacific framing. This, for me, highlights the fundamental differences between Pacific countries' approach to their foreign policies and Australia's core national interest. And I refer to the arc of instability framing that presented an arc of opportunity for Australia's arc of responsibility. We do know Australia is the largest donor in the region and has continued to step up through funding agreements as well. And this is acknowledged, this is also appreciated. But what should we know then is that findings from our research collaboration noted that whilst Australia is appreciated in its prompt response to disaster, relationships also is often amiss. There is work to be done. And that is not just for Australia, to be clear. It also with other development partners. It is important to note that the development and the security priorities of Pacific countries are not new, never has been. But these are complex challenges, and it is unrealistic to expect that it is the role of external parties to fix these national issues. It's about collaboration, because we know numerous evaluations speak to that reality. It is simply not sustainable. There is a shift to unbury traditional values and processes, as Pacific experiences have taught them the limitations of state-centric approaches to their development aspirations. The exercise of influence and power dominating the geopolitical discourse, to my mind, is fraught and futile. Concepts such as power and influence are multidimensional and relational in our communal societies. So how can we act? There needs to be a different mindset to ground the relationship with Pacific countries. One that is not grounded or dominated by fear. We need to give Pacific countries spaces to critique their own processes and priorities. We have seen Samoa done that. We have also seen Kiribati done that. The people of the Pacific are defining their own pathways in forging partnerships that respond to their development agenda. And to give an example, the island of Futuna is forging a sister relationship with New Zealand, according to a local official, because often the government is missing. So I will leave it there. I mean, finally, I think to speak to the theme of today, like most Pacific countries, I come from a society that Brad Shaw observed as having no paradigm of conflict or fear. And Samoa can point to numerous examples of maintaining order and peace in their own way. So fragmentations are viewed as mutual contradictions that we mutually emerge from. That is my definition of resilience. Whawhetai, and I'll leave it to my very experienced panel to correct and also to make sense of what I just said. Thank you very much.
Whawhetai, Maimo. Henry, I might invite you to throw some perspectives on Maima's comments.
Thank you very much, Margaret, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to an august audience such as the crowd that I am speaking to. I, of course, also acknowledge the landowners of this land, and Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, on which land I speak. But yeah, and I agree totally with most of everything that my colleague Maima has said. Maima and I used to work together in the past at the Australian National University. She's moved on and doing some interesting work at the University of Adelaide. I am still at the ENU. But before, I just want to make some qualifications. It's just not, and one of the qualification number one is that it's just not the Australian media that portrays the Pacific in the geopolitical as the current game that's happening in this part of the region. It's also scholars from the Australian scholars and Pacific Island scholars now contributing to this conversation. So, but the volume of scholarship conversation amongst Pacific Islanders isn't that great as yet. It's still dominated largely by New Zealand, Australian, and academic scholars. And I think this is an area that's really ripe for Pacific Islanders to contribute to the conversation. And thank you to the AIIA to allow for this conversation and Pacific Islanders to contribute to the narrative and the discourse. So that's my first point. The second qualification I want to make here is that the theme talks about the South Pacific. Well, it's not the South Pacific. There's also the Northern Pacific. And there's also what we Pacific Islanders now calling the Blue Pacific continent. So I think the coverage for such conversation should happen to the Blue Pacific. And there's also the Indo-Pacific. So there's this competing narrative in the Pacific with the competing narrative from the Indo-Pacific to widen the scope of conversation on geopolitics. Yeah? So I think when you're dealing with the Pacific, always be mindful of the fact that the Pacific is actually very guarded about its region, and it pushes the concept of Blue Pacific very strongly. It's part of the 2050 strategy. It's very, very clear. So that's just, if you're talking about there's Northern Pacific where they have the compact nations and you have the Southern Pacific. That's why the Pacific Islands Forum, South Pacific Islands Forum, was changed to the word Pacific Forum because it was going to be inclusive. That's the second kind of qualification that I'd like to make. The second qualification that I want to make to the conversation is that there is a suggestion implied that the Pacific Island governments and leaders, and perhaps as a region may not be managing the relationship, particularly with aid partners, responsibly in its relationship in this geopolitical environment. That's a suggestion. It's a quietly suggested implication. That's what I'm reading from it. But what we should recognize is that sovereignty, according to Pacific Islanders, is very important. It's the reason why they engage with China, they engage with the United States, they engage with Australia and elsewhere, and they preserve this sovereignty. You will see very recently in the public release of the Fiji National Security Strategy and Defense Review, it makes it very clear they want to be able to make sure that independence is preserved so it doesn't complicate the relationship with their partners. So that's just a qualification, some qualifications that I want to make. The third point I want to make, and relating to that is to carefully and sensitively manage the challenge of strategic contestations and negotiations or negotiating aid relations, which amidst this competition, and making sure that the overall international engagement policy of friends to all and enemies to none is maintained across the Pacific. It's going to be a tough ask, but that's the way Pacific Island states want to manage their relationships. As former Solomon Islands PM famously said, we deal with our international partners with eyes wide open. He said that in Parliament, and it was referring to his relationship with China, right? Now, in terms of climate change, it is the big issue, as my colleague has said. But it's not an issue just common for the Pacific Islands. It's an issue common for all of us: Australia, the Pacific, United States, France. It matters to everyone. So it's just the Pacific Islands. That's another qualification that I want to make. Now, my own village, it's situated along the East Kerama in the Gulf province. I'm from Kerama. So if you come to East Kerama, I am from the coast. Now, in a recent book, I was just reading last night, which I bought. It's actually by Rose Garno. Rose Garno used to be my chairman of the organization that I used to work for, PNG Sustainable Development Program. Now, in his book, in one of his sections, he talks about Rose Morauta, wife of the former Prime Minister of PNG, Makere Morauta, managing relations with Makere's relatives to relocate from their home to other homes that are on higher ground because their village has been inundated by high tide and rising sea level. Makere's village is about 2 villages away from my village. So my village, and so the same issue that they face is actually happening in my village as well. My own home, which my father built many years ago, is under threat of being washed away. So when we talk about climate change, we always, in the Pacific, generally tend to portray a picture of Tuvalu, an island that's very narrow, but the big impact of climate change will be in Papua New Guinea, on all the coastal areas of PNG, including the highlands, where the climate change will have impact on vegetation and people's way of living. So we live it daily. So that's the point I want to stress here, is that, the impact on climate change will have ramifications at all levels. My people will have to relocate to other people's land, which means they will have to fight over land that belongs to other people, get permission to settle on that land, and they've got to find a way in which they can find peaceful ways in which they can relocate without conflict. Yeah? So my people text me every day, your house is going to be washed away, please send some money so we can help relocate your father's building. And my question is, I don't have the money, but where is the climate fund finance that's available for people like my village people to access that fund? So, I note that Papua New Guinea has decided not to go to COP this year. It's a decision of the government of PNG, but I wish they went because it's part of the process of pressuring the world to take responsibility for what's impacting their own people. The last point I want to raise here before I conclude is that, indeed, so basically saying that geopolitical tensions in the Pacific are indeed secondary matters. And that's very true. The Secretary General of the Foreign Secretariat has said that geopolitical tensions are noise that's happening outside of our radar. But it's a noise that we should always be mindful of, take note of, and be prepared for. That's my qualification to the Secretary General's suggestion that it's just noise, but it's a noise that we must always be aware of and be prepared for it. In other words, we should be literate about what's happening at the geopolitical level to note the implications for our region's safety and security. And there's a last question that was asked for the panel is, so what should Australia's foreign policy should be to the Pacific Islands? What do Pacific Islanders expect of Australia? Well, my number one request is Australia, Pacific Islanders expect Australia to show, when I say the word leadership, it's like, take leadership of the climate change issue. That's what Pacific Island leaders expect of Australia, a developed country, and a member of the forum to take leadership and take the issue forward, and not go sideways. If you want to step up, you can't step sideways. You've got to step up, right? Really step up to it. That's your senior step up policy, a foreign aid policy. And second point is, it's always best to consult your Pacific, as my colleague Noam was saying, your Pacific family. We make so much issue about we're a Pacific family. Well, if you're a Pacific family, you must always make sure, as best as possible, consult with your Pacific neighbors and talanoa. Talk. It's only by talking with each other that you understand the issues that we face. But, as I was saying, when you come to the region, you open your door, we come into your house, we expect you to have plenty of food so we can talanoa more often, get to know each other, and understand each other. It's very basic relationship building effort across the region. That's all I want to conclude here. Make the consultations, genuine consultations, and learn to listen. That's my last request, learn to listen better. Yeah, Marlo.
Thank you, True Henry. That was very enlightening for me as someone who's not served in Papua New Guinea. I now invite Salote to say a few words.
Thank you, Excellency. It's truly an honor to be here with you all today. I would like to acknowledge AIIA's invitation to join this distinguished panel before you. There's a Maori proverb that goes, Kia whakato muri te haere whakamua, which translates to, I walk backward into my future with my eyes fixed on my past. There is value in not only seeking to improve relations with others, but acknowledging that building ties that last requires a plan that is informed by the lessons of history. Amid rising geopolitical tensions, we are witnessing not only increasing fragmentation, but also a growing sense of mistrust at all levels, globally, regionally, and nationally. We must rebuild trust, because without trust in each other, there is no hope for a commitment to action on issues that matter to us. What can Australia expect from the region? A lot of non-verbal cues. Traditional Fijian interaction between people read a lot into stance, manners, body language, and even silence. Yes, silence is a language in Pacific cultures. Eye contact is avoided during communication in Pacific cultures as a sign of respect, which can be awkward within Western communication styles. As communal societies, our value systems foster the Pacific way of consultative and collective action, which stems from the fundamental belief that places people at the center of their worldview. It values the contribution of every member to a collective goal, albeit the ability and nature of each contribution may not be equal. This is an important process which allows This is an important process within Pacific cultural identity and strengthens the cohesion of the group. It allows parties to invest in harnessing their comparative advantage, and in the absence of such, investing in building relationships to strengthen the network is vital. It asserts that the currency is multifaceted and that no singular type of contribution alone leads to the achievement of collective goals. Therefore, the rhetoric of family rings hollow because sometimes Australian actions speak louder than Australian rhetoric. Australia's climate change commitments and energy goals, securitization of the region, and inflexible development models continue to fuel an awakening in the region, pushing people to mobilize to reclaim their voices and mana. Because despite the growing international initiatives, they continue to be designed without us. Additionally, Pacific Island states are pursuing increasingly independent foreign policies due to national interests and global geopolitical shifts. This is why the Blue Pacific Continent Initiative is so important, because of its shared ownership, its centrality to our connection to each other, and our commitment to the survival of our region. Secondly, relationship matters. The quality of Australia's relationship matters because your urgency does not make it our priority. Australia's level of interest and willingness to engage with the Pacific cannot be determined merely by its strategic interests, because this is simply not sustainable. Recognize our spheres of influence. For a Fijian, that will, at the starting point, at the very foundational level, be the state or the matanitu. It'll be the church or lotu, and it'll be the vanua or land. And in its widest definition encompasses land, culture, identity, the ocean, the land, and the skies. So when you're speaking to a Fijian, understand that an indigenous Fijian will embody these three spheres of influence in addition to their school, in addition to the university they attended, in addition to the family they're married into, in addition to the country that they may have traveled to. So the spheres of influence for an Itoke person or an indigenous Fijian person varies, and is not only simply guided by the law or the policies or wherever they live. So it's multifaceted. Relationships matter, and the quality, Australia's level of interest and willingness to engage within the Pacific cannot be merely determined by strategic interests. And so the spheres of influence, more importantly, is how influences how we engage with others. Finally, my final point is Australia is an essential part of the Pacific region, with deep historical, cultural, and geographical ties. This is perhaps something that sets it apart from other development partners. And as a key player in the area, Australia holds a position of prominence. This is no doubt, and that is unique amongst its partners. However, it is important to recognize as well that it is not the only partner in our region. Therefore, how you do things in the region is more important than what you are doing. Your job is mostly dictated by your national interests, and so perhaps engaging respectfully and allowing the region, allowing the members of the region to also advance some of their own national interests, some of their own regional interests along with yours is probably something that the Pacific would like to see more of. And I would like to also acknowledge the point raised by Dr. Henry about terminology. Terminology is really critical. The use of language, names is sacred to Pacific communities, and this is something that we feel is often disempowering because most often terms and language that is used is often developed outside of our communities without our inputs. But words carry power, and names in all Pacific communities. There's a naming ceremony in all Pacific communities. So this puts, at the center of Pacific discourse, the importance of names and words and terminologies that are used to describe us, to talk about us, to engage with us. And so I'd like to reiterate the importance of terminology and the use of terms when working in the region. Thank you, Chair.
Binaka Bakaleva Salote. And now I invite John to speak.
Thanks, Margaret. First, like everybody, I'd like to thank the Institute for the honor of speaking here today. I come from a completely different perspective from my fellow speakers, each of whom is a practitioner in the area and established academics. I am here today representing the views of Fijians on the ground. I don't come from an intellectual or a theoretical background. I'm here and I'm going to speak for a few minutes to answer the last question in the topic, which is, what do we think of Australian aid initiatives? And I'd just like to share some perspectives. First, since the rise in the geostrategic focus and the focus on aid, the relationship between Fiji and Australia, at least from the public perception, seems to have become principally about aid, about your security and what you can give us. Prior to that, we were partners, we were friends, there was diplomacy, there was trade. The media space now is filled with Australian aid initiatives. And there's a risk that the old relationship, the diplomatic relationship, the partner relationship has become more transactional, and Australia is becoming more like a patron state to Fiji and the small countries, which is what it never was before or never wanted to be. The second thing is, it's easy for us in the Pacific Islands to be cynical about Australian initiatives because there's always the tension between Australia's self-interest and its declared intentions of benefiting us. And people will quickly point to the conflict between Australia's interest as a industrial country with coal and all of that, and its declared commitment to climate change initiatives. And it's easy for Pacific Islanders and critics to be cynical about that. But there's also examples of where Australian initiatives in their self-interest, which supposedly benefit us, actually have negative effects on us. And two recent examples for Fiji are the APTC initiatives and the PALM scheme. APTC, for those of you who don't know it, is a program under which Australia spends a lot of money in Fiji and I think in other regional countries, training our people in vocational pursuits. But many of these people, once they graduate, end up in Australia doing your tradie roles. So the net effect is negative for us. You've trained our people, and now they've gone. The PALM scheme, it has great intentions. It brings workers to Australia for a particular time, earning far much more money than they would earn at home. The idea is that they will send the remittances back. In reality, though, their presence here deprives us of scarce labor. Our Fiji depends on tourism. That's our biggest earner. When the PALM scheme started and when Australia relaxed its immigration rules, we lost so many people from the back office of hotels. Chefs, workers, gardeners, they all disappeared, which threw our own economic activity into crisis and caused, and has required us to spend a lot more time and money in training replacements. The PALM scheme also has had very, very significant negative effects socially, where the workers come over without their families. It's led to the abandonment of children, the breakdown of marriages, and it's all very well documented. So all of these initiatives have got to be thought through very carefully, and especially where there's clear benefits to Australia, the negative effects on our own societies are going to seem, sort of far worse than intended. Thirdly, familiarity breeds contempt. The more money you give us doesn't mean that we will love you more. In fact, the more you give us, the more cynical people will become, the more the relationship shifts to one of patronage rather than of partnership. Pacific Islanders understand very, very clearly that the aid is motivated by self-interest, and so therefore they're naturally cynical about the benevolence or about the media, the narrative that it's to benefit. In contrast, China doesn't have that kind of burden. China is already, in many Fijians' view, the bad guy, because they grew up, on Hollywood portrayals of nasty communists, so that the benefit of this for China is that China can spend far less, far more effectively. And I'll give you some examples. China currently spends much less on direct aid than it used to, but it does have a series of programs where people from key sectors go to China for familiarization and spend some time there. Recently, a group from the Great Council of Chiefs, a very, very influential group from the Great Council of Chiefs, including some very prominent chiefs, went to China for familiarization on agricultural projects. They've come back really, really impressed, and there's plans for more cooperation at that level. I work a lot with the media. I know that the media, China has a program where journalists and people working in newspapers and the media go to China for familiarization and training. There's similar programs in Australia. I listen to the reactions. When people come back from China, they're impressed. They come back with glowing reports of what happened in China because their expectation was so low, or the expectation was different to what they are shown. When they come to Australia, they go somewhere, and they come back, it's the Australia that they know, they're not impressed. Same thing happens with public servants. China is currently taking junior to mid-level public servants for training for about a month in Beijing. All of them, when they come back, also come back with glowing references. And these are people who, will become decision makers within their ministries in the near future. They will be influencing policy. So the point that I suppose I'm making is Australia needs to be more discerning or more strategic in the way that it plans and implements aid. The last thing I'd like to say is, even though we talk about the Blue Pacific, and it is a reality, we negotiate, we deal with each other regionally, and the regional perspective is a convenient one for analysis, we are not the same. Every country within the region is very, very different. The domestic politics within that country determine, and the circumstances of that country determine needs, determine how aid needs to be managed, how it can fail, and the challenges. For example, for Fiji, from 2006, when the Bainimarama government came, prior to the Bainimarama government in 2006, we were great friends with Australia. We were pro-West, we'd always been right from the British colonial days. That all changed in 2006 when Australia took what it considered to be an ethical, correct stand against the coup. As a result, the Bainimarama government ostracized Australia. Our relations went south. They were frozen. China was the favorite until it began to thaw out during the COVID period, when China withdrew within its borders, and your representatives worked very, very hard in Fiji in restoring warm relations. The government changed in December 2022 when a pro-Australian government has come to power. Rambuka is, sort of announced that the initiatives with China were going to end, but then he's had to back down on that because China cannot be excluded. We have to live with everyone. But the moral of the story, the point I'm trying to make, is that Australia's current warm relations with Fiji will only last for so long as this government is in power. It's a shaky coalition, and so who knows what will happen next. Australia has promised this government millions and millions and millions of dollars in assistance. It's not coming through. The projects are not coming to realization, and that's because I believe the bureaucratic capability to implement the programs is not there. So there's a bottleneck in getting your assistance through, and that's a risk for Australia because the big announcements are of what's to come, and it's not getting through. So in your aid planning, you've got to look at the capabilities of each of the islands to actually carry the projects through. And I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thanks. Inaka, John. Wow, a lot of food for thought there. I think one of the key roles of the diplomat is to be the bridge between countries and to foster understanding between nations. And I certainly learnt in my times in Fiji that the harder I studied to better explain to Australia the perspectives of Fijians, the more I learnt, the more I realised I didn't know. And honestly, I think I could have spent the next 30 years there working hard at it, and I'd still have more to learn. I think the points made about kinship by the panel were very, very important and pertinent. I was very impressed and fascinated to hear about the kinship aspect of the link to climate change and the fact that dislocation can lead to conflicts, internal conflicts between groups, tribes, about land ownership. It was something that I've not been exposed to before, so thank you for drawing out that very salient point. Chiefly structures is something that is unique to every sovereign Fijian Pacific state and important for us to study. And of course, the nexus between that and, in the case of all the panellists here, countries, Pacific countries that have adopted the Westminster system is both helpful and challenging. We tend to make assumptions about countries working with the Westminster system without necessarily understanding all those other layers, including chiefly structures, all the spheres of influence that Salote has talked about. Listening, so obvious, so important, hard sometimes. We talked a bit about the factor of time. Certainly there's lots of jokes in the Pacific about Pacific time. I've certainly learnt that giving time to issues is very, very important. At the same time, developments in the world are speeding up dramatically. And so the tension is greater than it's ever been. Our diplomats, our aid workers, everyone feels under pressure, as you say, John, to deliver. But how do we manage that with satisfactory time allocated to coming to a common understanding of what is required? Talanoa, a Fijian word for sitting around the kava bowl normally, but is talanoa a word that's now, it seems to now be accepted as a generic term in the Pacific. Would that be fair, Henry and Maimo?
Yes.
The concept?
Yes, and
Yeah.
so the Melanesians have come up with talk story now to counter
Oh,
Talanoa
okay.
as well. So.
Okay, talanoa, talk story, a very important feature. But as Salote says, our urgency is not necessarily a country's priority. Non-verbal cues, again, a very subtle art form, and why I'm very pleased that DFAT is now dedicating even greater presence in the Pacific than it has before, and it was always large, I might add. I went from a posting in Moscow back to Fiji. My embassy in Moscow was 11 Australians. I had it got up to 26 actually Australian diplomats in the embassy, the High Commission in Suva. Then I went to Italy where I had 5 Australian diplomats. So we've always dedicated a lot of our diplomatic service to the Pacific. We're doing even more. I think it's important that we develop a cohort because there is just so much to learn. It is the most complex of the regions that we deal with. It's easy to recognise that, but the work it takes to learn is very significant. I once heard a great essay by eminent Fijian jurist and thinker Ratujoni Mandrewiwi called "Silence Does Not Mean Assent." And I've taken that with me in all my discussions and negotiations in the Pacific. Silence does not mean assent. It's very easy for others to interpret that no objection means that. I'm very sorry to hear John's description about a shift from the old days of partnership to something more transactional. I think that's a very useful warning. It's certainly not the intention. I think we, partnership is exactly what we strive for. Good to know that we got somewhere with it in the past. But if that's the perception, it's something that needs to be addressed, and we look to you for guidance on how, and very grateful for what we've heard today. Familiarity breeding contempt, that's another very interesting point. I'd like to start discussion by picking up on John's point about the APTC, the Training College, and the labour mobility schemes. I've heard the points that has been made today by John about the costs that this involves, but also when we talk about listening and consulting with governments and leaderships about what they want from Australia, these have been two that we've been very, very heavily and consistently pressured to introduce for years and years and years. And despite misgivings at the early stages and always being conscious of the risks, we have proceeded. So I guess I'd like to ask what you think about the consultation mechanisms that we have. It's easy to say we should do it better, but how should we do it better? I'll open up with that and we can continue on.
Perhaps I could respond to that first, Margaret. It's damned if you do and damned if you don't, really. Yes, I will acknowledge that the government is completely, our government, the Fiji government, is completely in support of the Palm scheme. It's completely in support of the Palm scheme. But it's like that to meet a particular immediate need, which is foreign exchange, because it needs foreign exchange to balance its books. It's not looking long term. Where I was coming from is the reality is Australia has these schemes to meet its own needs, but also to promote its image. Whether or not our government approves of it, the social effects of the scheme are still a mark on Australia's reputation within the community. You know, so among the business community, they curse. At every forum you go to, they curse these schemes. To give you an idea of the scale of it, at the last sort of conference, business conference I went to some months ago, 6 or 7 months ago, it was up to 80,000 working people have left Fiji to work in Australia or New Zealand under one of these schemes. And when you think that we've only got a population of 900,000 people or thereabouts, for 70 to 80,000 skilled people to go away is a huge gap.
Can I just ask, John, what place is there in Fiji for consultation with the government, between the people and the government about this? Because at the end of the day, who do we take the lead from?
That is your challenge. Part of the problem is that for 16 years, from 2006 until 2022, we had the Bainimarama government, which was not a consultative model. It was a very centrist, directional kind of model of government. So during this time, the whole, all of the mechanisms for interministry consultation, for private sector consultation, for any kinds of consultation, were severely weakened or removed. So presently, that's part of the problem, even with aid project implementation. There's no systems in place, because it's all been broken for proper community consultation, and it's not about fault. It's not your fault, Australia. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that when you look at the outcome, you bear the criticism for that outcome, regardless of whether our government was complicit or agreed with the initiative.
Thanks, John. I want to pick up on another point you made about the needs and circumstances of every country being different, and very obviously so. The first lesson any Australian needs to learn is that the Pacific is no monolith, and every state, every nation state and every ethnic group needs to be understood as such. But regional architecture, so how do you think, is regional architecture in the Pacific, where these things get talked out, where you find your agency at the bigger levels, do you think it's fit for purpose? I might go to Salote first on that.
Thank you, Margaret. I think it's really important to look back in history and look at the purpose for the establishment of this, the regional architecture. And I think whilst the evolution throughout the region, different countries coming into independence, and initially it was really supposed to be that, that collaborative mechanism, to kind of pull together our resources, our issues, and take it to the regional and global stage as one voice. A lot has changed over the years. And I believe that, and this is why the element of time is so important, is allowing the region to really look back, take a step back and review and take stock of what has worked and what has not worked, and why not. And I feel that as a former diplomat working in particularly the re-engagement between Australia and Fiji from 2019, a lot of what I saw was our concept of time is very different. We don't have a concept of time. We don't have seasons. So we don't have to gather. We don't have to store. We don't have to, prepare for that. So it is so important to understand this, because when Australia is trying to meet deadlines, because of its own election cycle, because of its own financial reporting processes, we need time to really be able to sit with you and take stock of what is happening to us, because most time it's not happening with us. And I believe that this is really important, because when priorities are identified, because of the rush and because many of our officials, to be very blunt, are not even aware of the processes or the models that Australia applies when it conducts its foreign affairs, or when it reaches out and, and this is important because most times, because they cannot navigate these systems, they were left out. And whilst you have big, bold priority areas, the what is needed and the how to do it is not clear, because we are not informing those decisions. And then this is exacerbated by the model of managing contractors coming in. And this is why I guess defense diplomacy works so much better than foreign service work in the region, because our military look out and see their counterparts in the ADF. And they just get it, and they just know it, and they just do it. But for us, we're often met with managing contractors. And a lot of our people don't even understand that managing contractors are not Australian government officials. And so sometimes I just really want, and when I did a Vuvale partnership stocktake for most of last year, before we could start talking about the Vuvale partnership 2.0, and a lot of our officials at very senior levels did not even understand the Vuvale partnership and how it worked at the bilateral level, and how it worked at the regional level. So that, to me, indicated that we were not spending enough time together as partners in this grand, work schedule. So I would speak to the people in agriculture, and what they would say is, we've got this issue, and the Australians came in to do a review, and they've got a report. I would like to just speak to my counterpart in the agriculture department in Australia for us to work together, at least for 2 weeks, and we can do it. We don't have that luxury, and and it's unfortunate, because the military guys do it so well, and they continue to do training together. And I was really blessed to be part of the Australian War College in 2022, and I saw that work. I walked in thinking, why are military people so difficult, and why are they so different? I walked out appreciating why their work actually works and delivers impacts, and why we often struggle within the Foreign Service to achieve the intended results, but keep getting mixed bag results or outcomes, or totally unintended outcomes. So, it's the how, I guess.
That's extremely interesting to hear. Your point about talking is well taken. I've always felt that in my time in the Pacific, that talking is what gets things done and creates mutual understanding. But, it's physically quite difficult to manage things that way. And of course, the Australian government has to spend Australian money according to Australian accountability standards. So there's a tension there for sure, but something to always be aware of, I think. You raised an interesting point there about capacity and capacity building. So a lot of Australia's historical development assistance was concentrated on capacity building, helping finance ministries manage budgets, teaching accounting ways, training, doing training for foreign ministries, so we better understand each other. The other extreme of the aid spectrum is, of course, digging wells, and obviously most aid partners fall somewhere in between. There's been a bit of a shift in recent times from capacity building by offered by Australia to infrastructure development, largely because that's what countries are asking us for. And I think that does feed into a bit of competition within the region and amongst donor partners. But what's the view of the panel? Should we be concentrating more on capacity building or infrastructure, the direct needs? A mantra I often hear, we're interested in our direct needs, putting food on the table, having clean water. What's the panel's view on that dichotomy and where we should land? Maybe Henry?
You want to go first?
Well, you can all comment.
Okay, I'll comment in terms of, so capacity development is an area that I have worked a lot with, working both with the New Zealand and also with Australia. And one thing for sure is that there has been a lot of capacity development in the Pacific. I think the issue really is about, my experience has been that if there's a program of capacity development, there's very little assessment on what are the actual gaps of of capacity that actually requires the support. So it's like the template is made and then just go in and run the training. And often the consultation on what that training is, it's missing. Yeah. So I think it comes back to the point around, genuine talanoa, not just the talanoa, and I say talanoa also because in Samoa and Tokelau, talanoa is a word, and we use it in different mediums. The one thing that I would like to bring in that version of talanoa is soalau pule. This is acknowledging the authority of who you're dealing with and the expertise that they have and what they actually bring to the table of the conversation. Because when you engage in that level of acknowledging, it's the worthiness, then you actually understand there is a value to that conversation. There is a value that person will bring or that country will bring to there. Then you pay attention to the words. And you pay attention to what they are saying and why. Because often a lot of the narratives I hear, people talk the what. And there's very little understanding of the why, and that's why it's always missed. So capacity development has to go down to the why. But often the why is missing from when these designs are made. So in terms of infrastructure, it comes back to the point around, so what are the actual priorities of the country you're engaging with as a starting point? So when we did our study in Vanuatu and Solomon Islands, infrastructure was a big thing. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Solomon Islands. I know that my colleague Priestley is here, was part of this project. But one of the things that one of the researchers said that the roads in Solomon Islands were largely for the logging industry. So there is definitely a need for infrastructure. Some of the Pacific, in terms of research, they're saying Australia's engaging in the sector they've not been traditionally engaged with in their perception. And that is because of China. And when we were in Vanuatu, so there are areas that infrastructure works. But down in Tana, there's a big roading project that is going on. Up in Malakula, it's the same. And both Australia, ADB, is also involved in there, and also China is in that infrastructure. So these are the basic, because it's about access, that communities. So I cannot prescribe a one size, or one solution for the countries, but this is the value of the power of the diplomacy and the power of having genuine, really, really genuine conversation on the mutual equality of national interest. And that's where I come to that point of mutual contradictions and mutually emerging, because we constantly have to navigate it. And then it's like we forgo our own national interest for others, because from the Samoa perspective, it's always about collaboration. But we find our way back. So that's my short, just to address the point on capacity development.
Thanks. Would anyone else on the panel like to comment?
If I may, Margaret. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I mean, the reality of Fiji, speaking for Fiji, is that the infrastructure commitments, the infrastructure projects are held up because of the lack of capacity in the bureaucracy to manage them, to meet Australia's donor requirements, which are very, very technical and difficult. And so the infrastructure is not happening, even though it's been asked for, because the bureaucrats can't make it happen. Because they're not trained, they don't have the capacity or the numbers to be able to deliver on all of these promises.
Salote, anything to add?
I think aside from the inability to deliver, one is also about the different processes that each sort of stakeholder is required to contribute. And a lot of the times, like for example, within the Ministry of Finance alone, which really looks after the official development assistance, they lost, in my stocktake meetings with them last year, they lost about 21 auditors within a span of 12 months. And a lot of that is people just standing up and saying, we're migrating, we need to go away because of education, because of health issues. And so a lot of this, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's health, whether it's education, these issues are interdependable and they impact each other. And so for a lot of young people, they prioritize their children's education. And for them, the dismal educational outcomes for Fiji at the moment is not something that they would want for their children, so they're trying their best to come out. And these are skilled people that are leaving. And, studies show that educated parents will have educated children. And so we're losing not just one generation, but 2 generations in one go. And so I just, last week, I was on the phone with a former colleague who was the director of our National Disaster Management Office. A scientist, a woman who leads in the disaster reduction space. She's migrated to the US with her husband, who's a doctor. And they're brilliant children who high achievers as well. And so they're gone. And that's just one that I know. And there's many people that are leaving the country. So when it comes to infrastructure, they're all mutually reinforcing, they're all equally important, and they all impact each other as well. So it's something that we are continuing to grapple with, and I believe, with what John mentioned earlier in terms of labor mobility, we are also not able to make informed decisions about our engagement in these initiatives because we don't have Australia is not sharing data that is important to inform our engagement. As a diplomat here in 2019, I've been asking for our Pacific's contribution to the Australian economy under labor mobility, and we have not received that. What we've always received is how much our countries are making from the labor mobility. But what will help us is understanding how much we're contributing and how much we're getting out of that. Because when you do the math and when you unpack what this labor mobility engagement looks like, I've spoken to a lot of economists and people who've done surveys, and they are saying that at least 70% of the money made in Australia is kept in Australia. For example, superannuation, before they depart Australia, 35% tax is applied on superannuation for our workers, on top of the 15% that is taxed on the income they make. So aside from transport and accommodation and the like. So a lot of it is really about Australia helping our leaders to make informed decisions by the sharing of data that we don't have the systems for those data, we don't collect them, much less analyze them. So these are some of the ways that I feel that Australia can do more, needs to do more, so that we are able to come to the table and make meaningful contributions to how we engage and how we move forward. Thank you.
That's some very helpful advice. I know it's an issue that is being worked on. It was a point raised recently by President of Timor-Leste, José Ramos Horta, at a speech at the Press Club too. Look, we talked a bit about mutual interests and national interests and mutual interests. The role of a diplomat, of course, is to find common interests. That's how we can best get things working well together. And I wondered if any of you had some comments to make about what national interests in this changing atmosphere of geostrategic competition between great powers, do Australia and the Pacific have some mutual interests there? Over to any of you.
Okay, I'll yeah. Henry, yeah? Okay, I'll just start it. And there are certainly mutual interests. And I speak from the perspective of, our Prime Minister, Fiamir, has always come out to say that, Samoa is committed to the rules-based order. Samoa just hosted the Commonwealth, Heads of Governments meeting. So there is definitely commitment to the rules-based order. That's a mutual interest. And that, I think, there's a point of commonality there, and and there are, of course, the rules-based order have got so many different layers to that, as well, and the Pacific has come out with a declaration of personhood that is also going up in that system. So the Pacific countries are finding within that structure of the rules-based order, how can they leverage, their support and commitment to the rules-based order in order to advance their interest, their collective interest. And of course, at the national level, I know that for a fact Samoa will always uphold the international rules and also advocate for that, and they have come out in support of that.
Thank you. I think I'll just add that in my experience within Foreign Service, dealing with Australian diplomats in Australia, we're always going to have Australia, and Australia is always going to have us. There's no, there's no question there. And I remember, in the defense course, talking about, the anxiety that Australians always have about security, like everything is security, and this anxiety. And I've always felt like, is it because they're in a region and everyone around them looks so different to them? And I've always wondered that, like that anxiety, like what fuels it? And for me, I feel like it's something we're always going to grapple with. It's a question we'll always have, but sometimes Australia needs to be right and not worry about being liked. And this is what I see, that sometimes when it comes to speaking hard truths and pushing back and explaining why, it's easier for Australian diplomats because we're in this, if we don't do it, China will do it, that they are trying, it's a likability contest. And it's not helping us, it's not helping the Pacific, it's not helping the partners in the region. And so I feel that we need to already be at a point where we just be very honest and be very open and leave it at that, because like we can't get rid of each other whether we want to or not. It's just, and so I think it's really coming to that. And I think this is why the Bainimarama era, there was a lot of abrupt hard truths, and I feel like sometimes that's needed for the relationship to work. And it's something that we need to do for each other, because there's the recent defense and security review in Fiji, the bottom line was there's a trust deficit everywhere. And I feel that that's also something that we need to work on. And it'll come with, more truth-telling, and really come out and say, no, we're not going to do that. You can't have that because of this, instead of pandering to requests from Pacific countries, because fear of China coming in and delivering what they're asking. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. Henry, anything to add?
Well, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, James Marape, when he came to Australia last year and gave a speech in Parliament, he said Papua New Guineans and Australians are joined at the hip, meaning they're really close. That statement is not a light one. It's a very heavy statement. So the relationship between Papua New Guinea and Australia, as he said in that speech, joined at the hip goes a long way. It goes back through history and through colonialism. I mean, Papua New Guinea was a colony of Australia until 1975. In fact, we were like ACT at one point in time before we became independent. So to me, that statement reflects a lot about the relationship between Australia and Papua New Guinea in that sense. I mean, we're soon going to have NRL. Paid for by Australia. Yeah. And they're now looking at a package that attracts Australian players to come and play for the PNG government, PNG team. So that shows a lot about, you know, the exchange and growth of institutions, sports between Papua New Guinea and Australia. For example, when the state of origin is played, we don't have, there's allegations or claim that we don't have crime for about 60 minutes because everybody is busy watching the NRL, the sports on team. But that is to say that when we are joined at the hips, we share a lot of history, a lot of practices, cultural, sport exchange, as the whole works. And so in what I'm saying is, we just need to grow these things further.
Well, we've not got much time left, but I think the point you make about, you touched on public diplomacy, so perhaps we could just spend a couple of minutes talking about that. It's been a great delight for me to, now that I'm retired, to have time to watch an increasing ABC Pacific coverage. We now see Pacific journalists talking to camera, telling us what's going on in the region, in specific countries and at the regional level. And I know we're ramping up after a very sad period of retreating in terms of media activity by Australia in the region. But any comments that any of you would like to make about the role or the success so far and where we could do better respectively, mutually in public diplomacy?
Well, I think Australia needs to do a lot more public diplomacy in Fiji. There's very little, well, there's at least two levels, right? You do well at the decision maker level, but at the popular level amongst the people, there's very, very little awareness of Australia at the moment. And a lot more could be done in terms of cultural exchange and the arts and education and all of that, like that kind of direct engagement. There's a lot of room for it. It shouldn't just be about ABC. It should be about genuine presence and sharing of culture.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I mean, just to support also the, in our study, that was also one of the things that came up, and one of the recommendations from that then was around this kind of awareness of Australia, because what was found is that outside of Honiara or Port Vila, for example, people see Australia through the NGOs, you know, that they engage with, and so there needs to be that kind of level of engagement. But I think also it speaks to understanding the makeup of the Pacific countries. It's not just in the institutions. There's a whole there's a whole society out there. And one of the recommendations also that we're working on is in how do you engage with communities, understanding that the rules of engagement are set at the state level. And that, because that is also very important. Yeah. Thank you.
Henry?
Well, you know, I do a lot of public consultation, particularly for Australians who are, you know, moving to the Pacific, and they ask me advice such as how do we do public diplomacy, It's an answer to a question that I don't have the immediate answer to. But I've always said to them, there's a book by Tongan. His name is Epeli Hauofa. He's the father of the Blue Pacific, it said. But he wrote a book. It's a satirical book called Tales of the Tikon. That's what I always recommend to anyone who goes to the Pacific to read Tales of the Tikon. Not that I'm promoting the book itself, but you should read the content of the book because it's very satirical. It'll at least try to help inform you how Pacific Islands behave. This is more Polynesian, but I'm married to a Polynesian, so I understand the Polynesian context of things. So, but if you read it, that's what I always recommend. Even the Australian High Commissioner that went to Tonga, well, she's now 10, but she asked me, and I said, go read the Tales of the Tikon. She said, I've got the book. I said, yes, that should be a guide to the Pacific. Basically, yeah, sorry.
I started by reading Rajkumara's The Pacific Way, which probably goes to your point about looking backwards. Yes, there's certainly a lot to learn about looking forward. I think this has been living proof of the value of Talanoa. I'm sad I'm no longer a diplomat and can't go back and work on some of the points that you've all made, but hopefully a value to some of the rest of you. Talanoa versus the tensions of time, I think, is a challenge that we're all going to have to continue to grapple with. That I think we're going to have to continue to look carefully, as we always have done, but obviously haven't done well enough, the tensions, the finessing of capacity building work in the region, because capacity building, it seems, does remain very important with this frenzied activity that's going about. And I'd like to thank Salote for her point about abrupt, hard truths. I think that's something that needs to come from the Pacific to tell us. Rather, it's not something we can comfortably do. So, don't pander. Abrupt, hard truths are a key element, I think, of the times. So, look, thank you very much to all the panel. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you, Henry, Salote and Maima, and John, lovely to catch up again. I always know I can count on you to be interesting. So if you could thank panel, I think we break for lunch now and we'll see you at 1:30.